Let's begin by taking a look at the Launchpad Mini and GarageBand. But keep in mind, while I'll be using GarageBand in this demonstration, the Launchpad can be used really with any DAW that will accept MIDI input. So Soundtrap, FL Studio, PreSonus, any of those DAWs that take MIDI input can use this Launchpad. First, let's take a look at the device. So whether you are using either the Mini or the Launchpad X, you're going to see a similar setup where you have the 8x8 64 pad controllers in the center that you see here in light gray. And then along the top edge and the right edge, you will see a series of buttons. So when I first got this device and I started learning how to use it, obviously one of my early questions was, well, what do all these different buttons do? Well, let me share this with you. First of all, here in the upper left-hand corner, you have these arrow buttons, up, down, left, and right. And these are what are called navigation buttons, and they're used primarily in Ableton. Keep in mind that these launch pads were primarily designed to be used with the Ableton DAW software, which really works very differently than most of the standard DAWs out there. So these four buttons really are used primarily only in Ableton, which I use very little, seldom. So we're not really going to use those buttons. Now, over on the right edge, these buttons are what are called Ableton scene controls. And again, they're used and they're there primarily to be used with Ableton. So unless you're using Ableton, they don't really have much use. Back to the top edge, you'll see this one button labeled Session. So that button is used primarily when you're using Ableton in a live performance setting. And again, I don't use Ableton much, so I don't really use that button. And then on the bottom right corner, you see the stop solo mute button. And guess what? That's used mostly when you're in Ableton Live, which I don't use very much. So here's the first bit of good news, at least for me. Out of all these buttons, there's really only 3 of them that we're going to be concerned about. And it's the 3 buttons up here on the top edge. And above them, you see it says custom. And these are general MIDI buttons. And those are really the only 3 that we're going to use on this device. Now, some of you out there, I'm sure, are going, well, why do I need a device that has all these buttons that I'm not ever even going to use? Well, I would just submit this for your consideration. How many of you have something like this setting on your student workstations and you can honestly tell me that you know what every single one of these buttons and knobs do on these devices? And how often do you really use any of those buttons or devices outside of the power on, off, and maybe a couple other buttons? I mean, let's be honest. Most of us, if we come from the background like I do as a music teacher, that's probably the limit of our knowledge. So let's just get over that first and foremost. Now, back to the device. So when you first plug in the device, and let's say you're going to be using this with GarageBand, there are going to be some presets on your Launchpad device. So this first one, drums, the device is going to light up where you're going to have 4 groups of 4x4 buttons that are going to be used primarily when you're dealing with MIDI presets for the drums. Now, some things to keep in mind from sort of a technical standpoint. When you turn on the drum setting, keep in mind from the earlier video that when we're talking about MIDI, MIDI has 128 messages or signals that it can send that are numbered from 0 to 127. In the drum layout here with the Launchpad, this is how these pads are assigned, 36 up to 99. In much the same way, if you remember, if you think about the piano roll layout in any DAW, that piano roll layout starts on what we call C-2, which is MIDI message number 0, and it goes to 127, which is going to be, if I remember correctly, it's like a G8, I think. For the drum pad, we only have 64 keys. So even though MIDI has 128 messages it can send, a 64 pad controller is only going to be able to use 64 at a time. So with the drum controller, it starts on C on 36, which if you compare that to a MIDI keyboard, that's going to be C1. Now, that's significant because, so why is C1 or MIDI 36 important in a drum layout? Or if you're going to be using a MIDI drum preset? It's pretty universal with any DAW piano roll that The drum sounds are going to be assigned to the keys on your keyboard centered around C1 or MIDI 36. What I mean, for example, here is a snapshot from, this is actually from Logic for a drum preset. Logic is great because if you use a MIDI drum, it actually will show you in the piano roll which sounds are assigned to which keys. Here in Logic, you can see that C1 or MIDI 36 is assigned to the kick drum sound. So your kick drum in your drum pad control in the Launchpad is always going to be that bottom left key that's assigned to MIDI 36. Now above MIDI 36, each key is just numbered numerically. So you can see as you go up through these MIDI numbers what the different sounds are going to be. So key 38 is going to be your snare drum sound. Your closed hi-hat would be MIDI 42, going all the way up to MIDI 48, which is your high tom. And notice when we get up towards C3 that there are going to be some keys that don't have a sound assigned to them. So for example, MIDI 60, if you hit that on your drum controller, is not going to generate any sound, but MIDI number 59 is going to get that ride in. And then going down 58 doesn't have a sound assigned to it, so that's not going to generate any other sounds. 57 and 56 are going to give you crash right cowbell, and 55 has nothing assigned to it. So that's why these MIDI numbers are important, and that's why the drum control layout is going to work the way that it does. Okay, so you should be able to see I have my Launchpad Mini hooked up to my computer, and it's hard to see, but I do see the yellow, pink, blue, and green buttons. And here on the side, you see that I have Logic Pro set up, and I'm using Logic so you can see how the sounds are assigned to the keys. So when I use this C1, and you should see on the DAW keyboard over there on the left that it's showing me what is being set up. So sounds. Again, notice C3 is going to be up here, and when I use that key, no sound comes out because no sound's assigned to it. But 59 is, nothing's assigned there, nothing's assigned there. So you're only going to get sounds from the keys that have a sound assigned to it. Again, with the kick and snare, your students could be able to use the Launchpad to, improvise drum set parts. And they can record each of the sounds individually. So they can record just the kick. They can record the kick and the snare. And then they can go back and add a ride cymbal part to it. In Logic, you would go in, have your metronome turned on, set to record. And then you can use all your editing tools like you normally would. So yeah, you record yourself in. That's how you use it as a MIDI input with your Launchpad. Now let's take a look at how you can use your Launchpad as a chromatic keyboard. When you press the keys button in your 3 custom buttons up top, you're going to see a layout that looks like this. And in this layout, the Launchpad is set up like a piano keyboard. So with this setup, your bottom left key is going to be assigned to MIDI message number 60, which on the piano roll keyboard is going to be C3, or what we consider to be middle C. So this first line at the bottom is going to run from C3 to C4. And then one of the things that's kind of unique about this layout is the octave that's on the right is going to be duplicated in the row above it with the octave on the left. The pink keys are going to show you all of the C's on this chromatic keyboard. So C72 is going to be the next row at C4, then it goes to C5, to C6, and then the top key is C7, which is going to be MIDI message number 108. So by comparison, on your piano roll layout, your chromatic keyboard on the Launchpad is going to start at MIDI 60, which is going to be middle C, C3, and that's going to extend up to C7. Specifically, the way this is laid out is much like the white and the black keys are laid out on a traditional piano or synthesizer. And it moves chromatically this way. So these are your half steps moving across from left to right. The difference between this and the way that a traditional piano keyboard is set up is that the black keys, instead of those being offset so that they line up in between the white keys on the piano, because we're using this 8x8 pad controller, the black keys are going to appear directly above the corresponding white key. So with this, for example, you can see how these notes are laid out on a chromatic keyboard from C to C. So when you play from C to C in between the pink squares, you're going to get a C major scale. And students can be taught the note names on this keyboard layout with their Launchpad in the same way that you would teach them the note names on a piano keyboard. Again, one of the things that's great about the Launchpad is its flexibility. And the design of it, it can move from a drum pad to a chromatic keyboard in a way that's logical and makes sense. Essentially what they've done is they've taken 4 octaves from a traditional piano keyboard. Instead of putting them in the traditional linear layout from left to right, they've just stacked those octaves on top of each other, kind of like you might find on the ranks of an organ in a cathedral or something. So it's vertical rather than linear, the way these octaves are stacked. So let's take a look at how this might look and sound when you use this in any of your DAWs. In the part 1 video, I did demonstrate how you can use the Launchpad to record melodies, but just to go review and just so you can see and hear. So that's my C to C major scale, but we also are working chromatically. You can play major chords, play minor chords, nice little minor minor, C minor minor 7. So, you can teach melody, harmony, major minor tonalities, using this chromatic layout. This can be treated like any other traditional instrument. It just happens to be that it's an electronic instrument, but students can be taught how to use this just like they would any other instrument. But it's also engaging. I mean, it just looks cool. It has all these like lights and stuff on it. So I think there are a lot of advantages to this. It's one of those things that I feel like we sort of have to open our minds to and be open to sharing this with our students. So that's going to do it for part 2 of this series I'm working on about integrating and implementing the Launchpad Mini into your music technology classrooms and how it can be used for lots of apps other than just Ableton. As always, friends, thanks so much for watching. I hope you find these videos helpful and useful. If you do, I would encourage you, first of all, please subscribe. That's really super helpful to get more subscribers. And also, if you have colleagues that you think might benefit from the video, share it with them, let them know about it. I'm always here to help and in any way that I can, so please feel free to reach out to me. Email me at heath@mutechteachernet.com. And as always, check out the website, www.mutechteachernet.com. In the meantime, good luck to all of you and your students this year. Thanks for watching. This has been Heath with the Music Technology Teacher Network. Advocate, support, inspire, and create.